What's up, guys? 1-0 yesterday. Feels good saying that, although this has been a pretty bad stretch. The losing streak is broken, temporarily at least. Maybe we'll go on another nice losing streak. Who knows? But the under hit in game 2 of the White Sox Twins, both games in that doubleheader actually went under. I was a little bit worried because in the first game, the White Sox used a lot of their bullpen, but it didn't wind up mattering very much. Drew Thorpe, I think, put together a pretty good start in the game that I was on, so we get that win. Move on to today. It's a kind of interesting card, man. It's a weird card. There are a couple of games that maybe I'll just comment on real quickly. I do have one play, and I almost was going to take total in Washington and the Mets, which is Mackenzie Gore against David Peterson. That number looks like the market is heavily indicating on the under, though, and I do kind of see some arguments for the under, although the stats that I look at kind of lean more towards the over, but there are just too many conflicting indicators where I don't want to do that one. But that's Gore against Peterson. That line has gone down from 9 juice to the under down to 8.5. So it looks like it has moved down a little bit with 59% of the tickets on the over, but 89% of the cash on the under. But there are a few different things here because the first thing I looked at was that, well, Gore and Peterson actually both have really bad numbers in their careers against these opposing lineups. Gore is really bad against the Mets. Peterson's really bad against the Nationals. Each opposing lineup hits over 300 against the respective pitcher there. So those pitchers have not done well. And both of these lineups just saw those two pitchers like 2 starts ago for each of those pitchers. Like the Nationals just played the Mets in the other venue, I think in Washington, because I think this is in New York. They played in Washington 2 series ago, and these two pitchers matched up against each other. So these offenses just saw them. So that's another disadvantage to these pitchers, in my opinion, where these offenses, having just seen them, are going to be familiar with them and maybe be able to hit them. The one thing is both of those pitchers actually did well in the game. The game wound up being a 9-7 final, but it was one of those games. There were 2 games in a row where the Mets and Washington played low-scoring games that wound up shooting way over because of like huge amounts of runs and extra innings. I talked about it because I lost on an under in one of those. I think I lost on the under in the other one of these games, not the Gore-Peterson one, but the Gore-Peterson one also wound up being one where it was low scoring and then a ton of runs came down in extra innings. So it was a high-scoring game. So people might look at that and think, well, that was a high-scoring game. Mets, Washington. Mets can hit pretty well. Gore against Peterson. I don't know who they are. They're not really that good, right? Well, I would agree they're not really that good, even though their ERAs actually look better than they actually are. But the public might just see that and think, oh, it was a high-scoring game last time. Let's come in and take the over. But the over in that game, the high-scoring total in that game was actually misleading because both starters actually did pretty well in that game. But like I said, I think it comes down to the fact that these pitchers just aren't good against these opposing lineups, even though they both did have good starts in that one. I expect some regression there, and because the hitters just saw them, I do also expect regression for that reason as well. And just looking at the overall numbers for both of these pitchers, Gore and Peterson, they both have ERAs in the 3s, so you think, oh, that's pretty good, right? But then you look and no, they both have whips that are in the 1.4s, getting close to 1.5 base runners per inning. So those whips are not good. So both those pitchers, I think, are getting away with putting way too many men on base. And to an extent, I think they also did in that game that I just mentioned, the previous game where they faced off. So I do lean to the over in that one. I will mention quickly, I somewhat lean to the under in Seattle and Anaheim. I mean, I tend to never want to play an over in a Seattle game because Seattle just has really good starting pitching and not very good hitting. That one looks like it's moved down a little bit from 8 juice to the over at -125 down to 8 juice to the over at -120. So it does look like it's going down a little bit, and I don't see the market percentages on the total yet in that one. That pitching matchup, I think, is potentially conducive to an under, but I don't want to quite get there at that one. Seattle's got Luis Castillo pitching. He's a staple of Seattle's rotation, so Anaheim is very familiar with him, but Anaheim's offense doesn't have a lot of weapons, and Castillo's career numbers are pretty good against him with a batting average in the low 200s. So even though Anaheim's seen him a bunch, he's held them down. So, and he's a good pitcher overall. His numbers are still good this season. So that would tend to have me looking towards an under for that reason. Then on the Anaheim side, they actually have a guy who's making his major league debut, which is Jack Kohanowitz is pitching. He is making his debut. He's coming up, and I can't quite get a read on this guy, man, because Anaheim, they have so many starting pitcher injuries right now that they've had to bring up like multiple different starters, and it's guys that they're just throwing to the wolves, basically, like Davis Daniel or whatever his name is. He was a guy not putting up good stats in the minors, and they threw him into the fire. And I think he had one good start and two bad starts, and now they send him back down to AAA probably or whatever. So Anaheim's just trying a bunch of different things. But this Kohanowitz, I think, probably is actually a better prospect than Daniel is. He's one of the higher ranked prospects in Anaheim's organization, but I'm still not quite sure about him because he does have a 4-pitch arsenal, which is kind of what you want when you want to find a guy who might be able to start in the majors. He's got pretty typical arsenal, I would say: fastball, slider, curveball, changeup. But his fastball, he can get into the upper 90s, so that's pretty good. So he has a decent fastball, but it seems like the rest of his pitches, like his off-speed stuff, kind of all leaves a little bit something to be desired based on what I've seen. And he's coming straight up from Double-A, I think. So in a way, that does mean that Anaheim does think fairly highly of him. But in another way, they just kind of need arms because they don't even have enough to fill out their injured starting pitching rotation here. So you could see that in both ways, really. And you got to look at Kohanowitz's numbers in Double-A since he hasn't even pitched to Triple-A. So going from Double-A to the majors is also a huge jump. So you're stepping way up in class. So that could be like a bit of an adjustment to make. But then, of course, as I always say, when you have a starting pitcher who might have good stuff and the opposing lineups have never seen him before, and it's not a great offense in Seattle, it's possible that Kohanowitz comes out and has a decent start and that Seattle's offense doesn't really know what to expect out of him. So there is that aspect of it too, the unfamiliarity with that young arm coming up. They might have a little bit of an edge in that respect. But then looking at Kohanowitz, what he's done in Double-A, it's not that impressive, I wouldn't say. His ERA is like in the 5s, like over 5 in Double-A, and that doesn't really bode well for jumping from Double-A to the minor, or jumping from Double-A to the majors, But the one thing that I will say that he does have going for him is he started out rocky in Double-A, and then he really started turning it around. He's pitched a lot better in his more recent starts, and he's thrown 2 complete games and had better numbers in the last several starts, I think. So take away what you will from that. I just figured I'd comment. I usually do comment on these guys making their like major league debuts and stuff just to tell you what I think about it, but I'm not jumping in on that one. The game I am jumping in on and playing the total in is going to be an over in Atlanta, Arizona. And I actually think this total is too low. It came out at 8. I was able to jump in on 8 over just at the straight -110, but this line looks like it is on the move upward as I see it up to 8 juice to the over at -120 now, even though the percentages I was seeing in the market, I don't see any on pregame, but I saw some percentages on like Action Network that made me to believe that the over is public. I'm not surprised by that, but it also made me believe that the cash was actually potentially coming in on the other side. But based on what I'm seeing with the market moving up here, it doesn't seem that that's the case. It seems like there is money coming in on the over here, hopefully, because I do agree with it here. I think the 8 is a short number, man, because I think the books might figure that they have to line this based on how good these starting pitchers are. But I think we do have a hidden angle to, I mean, it's not really even that hidden, but I think there are other angles or other ways to look at this game that would point you towards an over and not an under in this one, even though both these pitchers, Fried and Fott, are both decent pitchers. And you could see an argument potentially for it being an under because both these pitchers are not that bad until you dig deeper into the stats and then realize, no, I think the over is actually going to be the play here. So it does look like the line is actually moving up on the total. So there is that. So hopefully that is an indicator that continues because it agrees with my thinking on this. Fried against Fott. Well, first of all, these teams are playing a 4th game in the series. So I don't know if that's going to mean that the bats are going to be tired or anything like that, but it could mean that the arms are tired as well. So you might have bullpens that aren't in the best shape. The Diamondbacks bullpen, I think, is not in good shape. They used 5 relievers yesterday, and their bullpen's a little bit iffy anyway. So I think that bullpen scenario, not great for Arizona. And if they have to get into that bullpen, I think that could be trouble. I mean, Atlanta's got a good offense, too. Arizona's got a decent offense, too. And we're in a pretty hitter-friendly park in Chase Field or whatever it is now in Arizona. Also a hitter-friendly park. So even though yesterday's game did go over and it was a 7-5, pretty high-scoring game, with efficient offense, too, with 12 runs scored on 17 hits. So a lot of the guys that got on base scored yesterday. But that doesn't concern me that much just because the pitching matchup, the offense is involved, the venue that's involved here, I do think point towards the over, even though yesterday's game did also go over. So like I said, Arizona's bullpen, pretty tired out, I would say. They used 5 of their relief pitchers yesterday, including some of their better relievers. Had to use Seawald for a save there, or Sewald, I don't know how to pronounce his name, for the save there. And then the Braves didn't use much of their bullpen, but I think they've probably kind of extended their bullpen to some extent during the series. This has been a pretty decent series so far. It's a 2-1 series so far right now, I think, with the Braves having won 2 with the first 2, and then Arizona taking last night's game, with Arizona being the returning National League champions, though they haven't been playing that well this year. And Atlanta, of course, being one of the better teams in baseball as well. And then we look at the starting pitching matchup here. I think this is where you get a lot of this too. So you got Max Fried. His numbers look pretty good this year, man, with a 3.18 ERA, 1.15 whip. That's all good. Strikeout walk numbers kind of start having you question it a little bit, though, with 88 strikeouts and 31 walks and 102 innings pitched. So that Fried is not a guy that comes in and strikes a lot of guys out. His walk numbers relative to the strikeout numbers, the strikeout walk ratio isn't that impressive. That number of walks is a little bit high, but then he does keep the hits down. He's only allowed 86 hits. Okay, fine. But what are his numbers against Arizona? Well, Fried and Fott actually both pitched against each other. It was the same pitching matchup way back on April 6th. I remember watching this game because I was at a March Madness party with some sports bettors from different sports betting communities there, some professional sports bettors. We were watching the Final Four games there on that Saturday, and baseball was on, and this game was on, Arizona-Atlanta, which was in Atlanta, I think, in this case. And both starting pitchers kind of struggled in that one, man. Max Fried and Brandon Pfaadt both pitched in that game. It wound up being a 9-8 total, and Fried went 4 1/3, gave up 10 hits, 7 earned runs, 8 runs, did have a 5-1 strikeout walk ratio. But you'll say, well, that's one game. Yeah, but he and Pfaadt are going to be kind of familiar to these opposing offenses because they did see them not that long ago. Although it was a couple months ago at this point in April. But I don't necessarily see these pitchers just turning it around after that, because then you dive into the stats and look at their career numbers. And we do have decent sample sizes, especially for Fried. We have a big sample size against the Diamondbacks, and it doesn't really get any better. The Diamondbacks are 24 for 81 off him lifetime, with 3 doubles, 2 home runs, 7 RBIs, 11-4 strikeout walk ratio, 296 batting average, and 737 OPS. So the OPS isn't that high. The batting average pretty high. So Fried, not just in that game earlier this season, but he struggled against them. And then because he did face them earlier this season, it does mean that there is a little bit of additional, like, more recent familiarity there where the Diamondbacks saw him not that long ago. So it's not going to be a situation where they're coming in and don't know what to expect, or they're unfamiliar with them. But you could argue that Fried remembers that start and wants to bounce back. Yeah, okay, fine. So there are some arguments there, but I still think the better argument is just that he's not really that good against these opposing hitters. And on the other side, Brandon Pfaadt, he's got a 4.19 ERA this year, which isn't that bad. His 1.19 whip is pretty decent, kind of indicating that he's a little bit better than what we think. He's got a 100-26 strikeout walk ratio, so that's actually pretty good, and only 102 hits allowed in 107 1/3 innings pitched. So he's actually the better strikeout pitcher here. I would debate that he might be the better pitcher over Max Fried based on these peripherals that we're seeing here in his higher strikeout numbers, but he has a lot of 14 home runs, so the long ball has been a problem for him, and Arizona is a stadium where some long balls do happen. It is a more hitter-friendly park, so that doesn't quite bode that well for Pfaadt. Pfaadt is coming off an odd shortened start. I don't know why the start was shortened. I don't know if he got injured, but now he's not missing a start anyway. I don't know. He went 4 1/3, giving up 7 hits, which is too many hits against San Diego, but somehow only allowed 1 earned run in that game and didn't walk anybody and had 6 strikeouts. So it was a decent start. He only threw 62 pitches, so he won't be tired, but still, I don't like this that much. So he also pitched, as I mentioned, in that game against Atlanta. Same game where Fried didn't do well. Fried got lit up, I remember, early in that game, and then Arizona started blowing the lead, and Atlanta almost came all the way back. Actually, Atlanta did come all the way back and win. I think Arizona was blowing Fried out of the water early and had a big lead, and then they must have blown the lead. I think it was probably like 8-3 Arizona. At some point, it wound up being a 9-8 Atlanta win. That's just crazy. Fought in that game, went 5 2/3, gave up 8 hits, 5 earned runs, did have a 7-1 strikeout walk ratio. So both pitchers had good strikeout walk numbers in that game, but they gave up a lot of hits and runs in the game and did not pitch well. So again, you have a situation where a pitcher did not do that well, somewhat recently faced these opposing hitters. These lineups are good, although of course Atlanta did have Acuna back then, and they don't have him now. But even so, take Acuna out of the equation here. Fott's numbers are still just not very good against Atlanta, although a lot of it is from that one game. But that also tells you that Fott came into that game not being very familiar to the Atlanta hitters, and they still just hit him. And we're able to hit him pretty well. So that doesn't bode well for Fott, really. So Atlanta's hitters overall, which mostly come from that start, are 7 for 23 off in lifetime with 3 doubles, a home run, 4 RBIs, 5-1 strikeout walk ratio, but a 304 batting average and pretty high 899 OPS, although it is only in 23 at bats, but that's not nothing. So both of these starting pitchers faced these opposing lineups earlier this season, didn't do well. And on the one hand, even though you could expect some sort of, regression, if you want to call it that, some movement back towards like the mean, because both of these pitchers aren't really that bad. But you could also say that it's a matchup thing, and these pitchers just don't match up well against these opposing hitters. These offenses both are not that bad. I tend to lean more in that direction this time. And because these offenses did see those pitchers not that long ago, I think it does help with these offenses being a little bit extra familiar with them as well, even though it was back in April. So that's going to do it, man. I'm actually on the over in this one, even though it is a game where I think the public is going to be coming in and playing it over in a Braves game, Braves Diamondbacks. They know that these teams can hit, but in this case, I tend to agree with that as well. And I think these pitchers, the books might be overvaluing the pitchers a little bit and weighing their season stats, which I do understand. I mean, these pitchers are not bad, but just the individual matchup level, I think, doesn't bode as well for these pitchers. So I'm on the over in Atlanta, Arizona. And then if it gets to the bullpens, hopefully that winds up playing out okay too, especially with Arizona's bullpen being kind of wiped out and not being that good anyway. So hopefully it happens. Hopefully yesterday was the start of a new win streak to try to get back on track here, man, because this has been pretty awful. Atlanta, Arizona, over 8. And I still saw it out there at minus 110, so hopefully it still is. You might have to lay minus 115 on it right now, whatever the case may be. Let's do it. Peace.